Okay, good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are. My name is Mamuka Tsereteli. I'm a head of America Georgia Business Council and also a senior fellow at Central Asia Caucasus Institute at American Foreign Policy Council. I'm also a board member of American Friends of Georgia, and for 10 years I led, more than 10 years, Georgian Association in the United States. So this is a joint event of American Friends of Georgia, Georgian Association, and American Georgia Business Council. And we are here gathered to discuss 100 years of Soviet invasion of Georgia in 1921. And I think it's symbolic that we have several Georgian organizations joined together for this event. In times of lack of unity in Georgia, showing some unity in the United States, I think it's helpful and makes some sense. I also wanted to mention sad news about tragic passing away our good friend Job Henning, board member for American Friends of Georgia, longtime supporter of American Georgia Business Council and obviously Georgian Association. Job's wife, Nino Jafaridze, led Georgian Association for many years. And I would like to send our joint condolences to Nino and to their three wonderful children in these very difficult times. So we are gathered today, as I mentioned, to discuss history of 100 years old, but also to link that history to some of the modern day developments. And we have a wonderful set of speakers, wonderful speakers, very knowledgeable historians who know history and read history deeply, but also who see developments of today and modern developments in linking it to the history and understanding it through the prism of history. So that's one of the objectives of our discussion today, to see the modern day development through the prism of history. Professor Stephen Jones from Mount Holyoke College will go first, and Stephen is obviously world-known historian of and scholar of, and probably the best scholar in the world of First Georgian Republic. And I had an honor of, I mean, he's author of many books, and I had an honor to be contributor of a couple of his books, and he really deserves a lot of credits for all the work he's done for the research of First Georgia Republic, and obviously this is a key subject of discussion today. Our next speaker will be Mr. Beka Kovachidze, Dr. Kovachidze, Associate Professor at Ilia University and Director for Graduate Programs there. Beka was participant of our conference, Georgian Association conference hosted by Georgian Association 3 years ago with Stephen and I and other colleagues from Georgian Association. We hosted 100 years of anniversary of First Georgian Republic, and Beka was a star speaker there. And every time we have an opportunity to have discussion like this, we definitely want Beka to be part of it. And also very thorough and deep historian who looks at details and can see those details in a larger picture. And of course, last but not least, our good friend, Dr. James Carafano, Vice President, Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy, and E.W. Richardson Fellow at Heritage Foundation. Jim is not only great strategist and military expert, but also a great historian, and spent a lot of his time in researching, again, connectivity between events of the past and modernity. Close to the end, we'll have a short intervention from our good friend, President of American Friends of Georgia, Simon Sidamon Eristow, who will share his short story of his family, how his grandfather, a military in Georgian army who fought in the Black Sea area, ended up coming to United States with the help of American servicemen and American consul general. So I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to be together. Again, one more time to look at history, but also look at the connections that and lessons that history gave us for where we are today and what we will be, what we will need to do in order to move forward in building statehood of Georgia, enhancing it, and also finding right place in the world. So, Stephen, floor is yours. And by the way, we aim at around 10, maximum 15 minutes, hopefully. And then that give us time to have some discussion, meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamukar, and thank you very much for organizing this. It's a great pleasure to see you all. And I'm actually a political scientist as well as a historian. And I'm going to stretch Mamukar's tolerance because I want to connect right at the beginning, the parallels, if you like, between what we're seeing today and what's going on during the First Republic, 1918-21. I will also stretch his tolerance, no doubt, because I will take maximum 15 minutes. I will take no more, Mamukar, and you can cut me off if I do. But that, you know, it's such a complex topic. So let me start. So when we look at Georgian politics today, surely it reminds us of the vital links between domestic and foreign policy. The conflicts between the UNM and Georgian Dream led to the resignation of Prime Minister Giorgi Gakharia and to the negative reactions among Georgian allies. The Center for European Policy Studies, in a report this February, in its talking about Georgia, called the country, quote, a dysfunctional democracy, precisely because of the imprisonment of Nika Melia. The US State Department reacted to these events by urging, quote, the Georgian government to act in line with its Euro-Atlantic aspirations and to reinforce its commitment to the principles of democracy, end of quote. Whether or not these are accurate statements, they highlight the impact that domestic policies can have on Georgia's external relations, which expose its vulnerabilities. This is what Gakharia, former Prime Minister Giorgi Gakharia, meant when he said, quote, polarization and confrontation pose the greatest risks to our country's future and economic development. Kakha Kaladze was a little more philosophical. He's the current mayor of Tbilisi and the Secretary General of Georgian Dream. He put it another way. He said, 100 years after the Soviet occupation, we still have not agreed on basic principles of the state. So before I move on to the First Republic, let me just say a few more words about the reaction to the West to this very, very serious crisis in Georgia. My argument is relevant to the experience of the First Republic, which, like Georgia today, was focused on the West's acceptance of Georgia's European status and of its democratic credentials. The contention in 1918-21 during the First Republic, like today, was that a democratic Georgia would attract Western support. More than that, Georgia was European. It belonged to the Western family. Both points are true, but only as so far as they go. Europe, I don't think, has never been what Georgians imagined it to be. And our experience in the US over the last 4 years, if not more, suggests that the US isn't quite the remarkable democratic model either that Georgians thought it was. When I hear European or US politicians condemn Georgia's slide into authoritarianism, I want to ask them, do you not think the West is part of the problem too? There is no longer a solid case to be made that we, the West, are better than you, Georgia. More than that, despite the enormous benefits Georgia's alliance with the West has provided in terms of security, especially from Russian threats, Western policies have also contributed to Georgia's insecurity, particularly when it comes to the economy, which continues to be one of the most serious security threats Georgia faces today. Statistically, economic security, political stability, and democracy all go together, and the workings of all three have a dramatic impact on Georgian foreign policy. The differences between 1918-21 and 2021 are immense. Today, Georgia is in a far better position economically and internationally than it was 100 years ago. Today's international community, despite what I said above, promotes Georgian democracy and defends Georgian sovereignty. Georgia, unlike the period leading up to February 1921, is integrated into the international community, even if it has not found prosperity or its place in the global economy. In 1921, the international situation was disastrous for small states like Georgia. The world had just emerged from a global catastrophe. And despite Woodrow Wilson's aspirations, colonialism, imperialism, and indifference to the needs of small states was the norm. The conditions in the South Caucasus were catastrophic. Georgia was surrounded by avaricious imperial states. It had no domestic revenues. It was beset by ethnic conflicts at home and border conflicts with all of its neighbors. In the midst of trying to build a democratic state, it faced existential crises every day. Quite honestly, I'm amazed the republic lasted so long. It survived for 2 years and 8 months, and its achievements in that short period were truly impressive. Maybe I should be talking about its resilience rather than its weakness. But today, in the context of Georgian domestic politics in 2021, I can't help thinking about Georgia's vulnerabilities and the parallels with the situation in 1921. The reemergence, for example, of the Russian-Turkish Entente in the South Caucasus is a repetition of 1921, when Ataturk and Lenin pursued a deal which ended up with the elimination of an independent Georgia. Western states contributed to that outcome in 1921, unfortunately. Lloyd George had already begun his own reset with Soviet Russia in March 1920, when he started trade negotiations. The West cannot avoid their part in the current shift in the geopolitical order in the South Caucasus either, which is not favorable to Georgia as a small independent state squeezed between two anti-Western powers, even if one of them is a NATO member. But now to focus more specifically on the period of 1918-21, when I think about Georgia's vulnerabilities in that period, and I've mentioned this already, the disastrous economic situation first comes to mind. The economy, unemployment, corruption, hyperinflation, they were all related to the young republic's security. They were disastrous for maintaining its defense and financing the army and the People's Guard. Much of this was the result of events outside the government's control, but it underlines, like today, the intersection between economic security and external security. The second issue, which tragically opened Georgia up to foreign intervention in 1921, just as it did in the 1990s and 2000s, was the disaffection of Georgia's national minorities. The First Republic, inspired by socialist egalitarianism, defended national minority rights more than any other European democracy at the time. But in practice, despite the promotion of cultural and linguistic rights for Abkhazians, Ossetians, Armenians, the Georgian government alienated its national religious minorities, most notably Ossetians in Shida-Kartli, part of what we now call South Ossetia, Abkhazians in Sukhumi district, Muslims in Batumi, and Armenian villagers, crucially, in Barchalo, where the invasion began. And I believe that this neglect of national minorities, or the national minority question, was central to the Bolshevik success in 1921. A most serious policy area in 1918-21 was the creation of a dual military system, the People's Guard and the army. This bifurcated system was generated by the Social Democrats' admiration of the Swiss militia and their distrust of organized armies. The People's Guard initially saved the Republic from internal anarchy and external attacks, but that dual system was dysfunctional. In this respect, Georgia is far better off today, but the more general problem remains. Can Georgian armed forces, however they are organized and financed, ever resist Russian military forces in a fight? And if not, then what other forms of security are there? One of the obvious ones, and I'm coming to the end here, Mamuka, in 1918 to 1921 was regional cooperation. The First Republic tried to create a system of regional security by calling 3 trilateral conferences between the South Caucasian republics. It was a case, as Benjamin Franklin allegedly said of the 13 American colonies in 1776, of either hanging together or hanging separately. In 1918 to 21, regional cooperation, or hanging together, was the best way to resist the Bolsheviks and other external threats. Demonstrated cooperation between the 3 republics was also important to Western support. But Georgia was also part of the problem. Georgian government made numerous territorial claims in Sochi, Zaqatala, Trabzon even, that were not always just justified, and which undermined regional cooperation with its neighbors, overstretched its military forces, and alienated local populations. Finally, Kaki Çxenkelli, Georgia's first foreign minister, wrote in his diary on July 1920, quote, "The monopoly of power was rotting the party," end of quote. These are strong words, but he was underlining Benjamin Disraeli's argument that, quote, "No government can be long secure without a formidable opposition," end of quote. In Georgia, the absence of an effective opposition in 1918 to 21, which was not entirely the government's fault, encouraged complacency and a lack of accountability. Shalva Nutsubidze, a socialist federalist, part of the opposition, complained that the Social Democrats operated a parallel parliament and only brought finished business to the Constituent Assembly to be ratified. I am a great admirer of the extraordinary achievements of the First Republic, but without an effective opposition, combined with the monopoly of one party, it led to an increasingly unresponsive and corrupt system. And I believe there are clear parallels today. Let me end with the words of former President Saakashvili, who frequently contradicted his own avowed goals. But I believe he was dead right when he said the following in his inaugural speech in 2008. Quote, "We rise or fall as a nation depending on the strength and the integrity of our institutions, a strong democracy, an empowered opposition, an independent judiciary, a civilian-led military, an accountable government, and a thriving civil society." And I would like to end with those words. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Very thought-provoking presentation. And I wish if only words of politician and deeds of politician were the same, how lucky we all probably would have been. And here I would like to give floor now to Beka Kobakidze. Beka, please, floor is yours.
Mamuka, thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for organizing this panel discussion today. I'll also draw parallels between current Georgia and Georgia of 1918-1921. And as we already discussed before the webinar, now I'm kind of editing Stephen's book, and I'm putting some comments on the things where I slightly disagree with him, and we are having debates around various issues. And here I would like to paraphrase the chairman of the Constituent Assembly. He was writing a friendly report to the chairman of the Constituent Assembly. I mean, the deputy chairman was Alexander Lompatidze, and he was writing reports to the chair.
Becca, I'm sorry, there is some problem with the sound. So is your mic fixed or is it moving?
Oh no, it's built-in mic.
Okay, please go ahead, because there's some kind of edit sound, sort of some noise. But please go ahead.
Okay, right. So am I heard now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So Lomtatidze was reporting to the chairman that the greatest weakness of our Constituent Assembly is small number of opposition, and we are getting too much relaxed because the number of the opposition deputies is small, and he hoped that this number in the future would increase. I mean, he was not showing off by writing this letter, because it was an intimate letter between two party members. Obviously, a success of the Social Democratic Party in the First Republic was very well deserved, because they had 30 years of political experience and they were stretched all over the country. They had very strong political organizations in the regions, in the center, elsewhere. They actually prevailed other parties, but they had appreciation of multi-party state, and they realized that having opposition was very important. They never attempted and tried to destroy and crush the opposition. Moreover, parliamentary or constitutional assembly commissions, or today's what we call committees, parliamentary committees, were often chaired by the opposition members. Foreign envoys and diplomats very frequently were opposition party members, and the power, in a way, was delegated. For example, State Controller's office was controlled by the opposition, so chairman of the State Controller's office was opposition or politician. This makes Georgia of 1918-1921 quite different from the current Georgia, because First Republic was a heir of the Imperial Russia. This state emerged on the ruins of the Imperial Russia. You know, whatever you call it, Imperial Russia was the Western state. It was the Western power. It had bridges with the West. It had a Western educational system. It was in geopolitical alliances with the West. And all these political ideas about liberalism, about democracy, about socialism was coming all the way from Europe through Russia into Georgia with Georgian colors, as Stephen puts it, right? So it was kind of a Western experiment, what we were having in the First Republic. But current Georgia emerged on different ruins. In 1917, when Bolsheviks took over Russia, or hijacked Russia, they ruined the bridges which Russia had with the West. They built fences, and they isolated Russia, or post-imperial Russia, from the Western civilization. And then Georgia in 1991 was born, and it emerged on the ruins of the Soviet Empire. So the society was different in Georgia of 1980s and in 1990s. Very different from Georgia society in the First Republic. Primarily, it is about judging between black and white. This imperative and polarized thinking that if you are not with us, you are our enemy, which follows Georgia's recent or last 30 years history, the red line. You know, many things changed in Georgia, but this never changed. Every government, starting from 1991 to today, aims at fully humiliating opposition, and every opposition wants to just not to overtake and to build on the previous success, but to crush the government and fight against its legacy. Even today, what we are thinking, after more than 8 years in the power, Georgian Dream government still is speaking about so-called bloody 9 years legacy of the Rose Revolution, and still the various prime ministers stress on destroying opposition. So this is not something very good. In Georgia, things were changing from 1991. First, government change took place through the civil war, then it was a revolution, then it was through the election, but there still is room for improvement. And politicians should become able to speak in a civilized manner. Now, I would like also to touch upon geopolitical perspectives, as similarities and differences between the First Republic and current Georgia. First Republic was born in May 1918, and May 26th, the day of Declaration of Independence, it wasn't a day of celebration. It wasn't a day of festivities. No, it was a day of fear, rather. Because in 1918, you still had formally established imperial international law, international justice, and which envisaged the occupation of smaller by bigger, and it was legal. Now, in 1918, you didn't have OSCE or European Union or UN or anything like that. Now, if you were occupied, nobody would come at your house. So you needed foreign sponsor for your independence as a smaller state. And such sponsor temporarily was found in the forms of the German Empire. But when independence was declared, Georgians didn't know what is going to happen tomorrow, because there are two rival empires, Russia and Turkey, and there is basically no one for the moment at our help. And in current Georgia, perspectives are different. Today there are many international organizations, international partners. International engagement in Georgia is on much bigger scale. However, still, maybe it is not enough. And currently Georgia still faces Russian occupation on its territories in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And what we are seeing today is also declining of the Western presence in the Caucasus. So as we see in Karabakh War of the last year, Russia and Turkey again made entente, as Stephen noted in his speech, and West didn't play any role whatsoever. And now, is this process is still going on, most probably will be taken out kind of pro-Western politician Pashinyan from Armenia, and instead of him, there was reinforced Aliyev's regime in Azerbaijan. And this was sent a message to the countries in the Caucasus and outside the Caucasus that if you are a man like Aliyev, you have a better prospect in the Caucasus. If you are someone like Pashinyan, striving for liberal democracy, you are going to have a huge problem. And Western response basically was absent. And that's when I said that what happened in Azerbaijan and Armenia, this is potential menace to the Georgian democracy, because weakening democracies in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, and strengthening of authoritarian tendencies also affect Georgia, because Georgia is not isolated from the region, but rather it's part of the part of the region. And I would like to draw another parallel with the First Republic. So the Soviets never broke into Georgia until there was Allied presence, or the Western presence of the Allied powers in Georgia. So in summer 1918, there were deployed 20,000 up to 20,000 German troops in Georgia. Germany lost the war, and Germans were taken over by the British militaries, and 20,000 British troops were deployed in the Caucasus, occupying the strategic line of Baku-Batumi. And the Russians, both White Russians or volunteer army or the Soviet Red Russia, never attempted to attack Georgia until the Brits were on the ground. But Brits left gradually. Most of the troops were evacuated in September 1919, and the last remaining brigade was evacuated from the Batumi region in July 1920. This was the moment when Soviet Russia saw seized its opportunity to occupy the rest of the region, because Soviets attempted to occupy Georgia in May, at the beginning of May 1920, but Lenin personally halted the operation because the British troops were there. UK had trade negotiations with the UK, and Lenin could not afford taking such a big risks. But as soon as the British troops left Georgia, the gateway for the Soviet invasion was open. So, I mean, even today, I see that Georgia is getting into a precarious position, that the government is showing, current Georgian government is showing kind of authoritarian tendencies. And we very much hope, I personally, as a Georgian citizen, hopes that there will be a Western response to that. And I very much hope also that this suggestion from Turkish and Azerbaijani presidents of the regional formats will not be implemented. I mean, I would remind you that there was suggested regional format of the 6 powers, so Russia, Iran, Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. So if this format is ever created, this further weakens Western presence in the Caucasus and leaves Georgia at mercy of its big neighbors. So if this format is ever created, then we see that Azerbaijan is backed by Turkey, Armenia is going to be backed by Russia, and by whom Georgia is going to be backed in this regional format. So there are lessons which the First Republic draws for us, and I think that both inside Georgia and outside Georgia in the West, politicians should learn. I would rather stop here, and then in the course of the discussion, I can answer further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. We still had some issues with your voice. So next time, maybe when you when your turn comes sort of to speak, maybe we'll try to maybe turn video off and see if voice will be better that way. We could hear you, but there was some noise accompanying the voice. So, Dr. Carafano, you've heard some interesting comments and very interesting parallels. Our region just went through very significant, I would say, tectonic changes in the geopolitical environment. And you, as somebody who watches the world in general, but also this region for many years, please share your views on what you see and what you expect to see, and what you want to see maybe.
So I am doubly honored to be here today. First of all, I think the U.S.-Georgian partnership is so important, and so anytime I have an opportunity to engage in a dialogue on that, I'm just very excited. And thank you for all you guys have done to really kind of facilitate the great transatlantic dialogue. So it's a really honor for me to participate. Also, I never got to practice my historian DNA, so thanks. This is really super exciting for me. So I actually want to focus on the absolute contrast between 1921 and 2021. I mean, in many ways, 1921 was remarkable. The Georgian Constitution recognized the freedom and indivisibility of the state, protected citizens' core civil and human rights, had equality under the law, provided for gender equality, protected minorities, ensured the freedom and belief and expression and peaceful assembly. In many ways, it was a remarkable document and a remarkable achievement. But the reality is that aside, and all of all of Georgia's internal challenges and regional challenges aside, it didn't matter about the mistakes you made or anything else. Georgia got crushed because it got occupied by the Soviet Union. And there was no one to really stop it, as Becca points out. That's not the strategic situation we're in today. And we really ought to focus on the difference and what difference Georgians can make. And so my frame of reference isn't actually the chaotic, horrible, terrible world of 1918 and 1921, in which small powers were literally little speed bumps in the universe of great things. But it was really the post-war period after World War II, in which small powers, ironically, even though it came out of a war equally devastating and destructive, actually had a lot of agency. And if you look at what happened, the Soviets, after they rolled over the initial countries, Stalin really stopped to consolidate his power and influence really until 1948. And it's in 1948 that the Soviets really start looking aggressively again to expand their sphere of influence in Western Europe. And largely they failed. And the reason why they failed is because when Stalin started that campaign again, he wasn't facing the Western Europe of 1945 or the Europe of 1921. He wasn't facing a lot of prostrate, defeated, crushed, friendless states. The Allies did a lot of planning for the post-war period, most of which turned out to be totally useless and wrong. But they did have this core idea they called the disease and unrest formula, which was they had very modest goals for Western Europe, which is, look, as long as we can get a modicum of security, a modicum of good governance, and a modicum of economic life and personal safety and economic activity, and people aren't dying of plague and everything else, these guys will figure it out. And by 1948, the US and the Western power had largely achieved that. And so when Stalin went back on the offensive, he was not pushing against an open door. And because the Cold War had broken out and because Western Europe became strategically important to the United States, there was an option there. So what we shouldn't forget in this is obviously, the Western military presence, the United States, and when it eventually became NATO, was obviously very important in stopping the Soviets. But we cannot forget the importance of political governance in the states of Western Europe that contributed to their own ability to maintain their freedom and independence. And there were different formulas for that. Of course, in Western Germany, you had one party that literally politically dominated. But in the country that I worked on the most, which was Austria, that wasn't the case at all. You actually had three political parties, which didn't like each other, didn't like sharing power, and were perfectly happy to kind of stab each other in the back. But what they did agree on is they did not want to be a suburb of Moscow. And after they kind of purged the communists from the political scene, there was political solidarity to the point that it was more important for them to resist the external influence from the Soviet Union than it was to decide on their internal political dynamics. And that made Austria a tough nut to crack. And in 1955, Khrushchev just kind of threw up his hands and gave up. And it was, I think, maybe really the only case in Western Europe where the Soviets actually voluntarily walked away from an occupation and Austria became an independent neutral state. That was great for the United States in the West. A neutral Austria was better than one in the Soviet camp. And I think there's a powerful lesson there. The role of small states in great power competition is incredibly important, and a couple of things may give small states an outside importance, and we've talked about this before. And the Georgia of today has all of those. You are in a strategically important place, a vitally important crossroads that makes your success and your future important to the United States and to the West. You are a net contributor to peace and security. You've been a net contributor in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places as well. So Georgia has the potential to be a net contributor. And, you know, despite all your problems and differences and struggles, Georgia has a remarkable DNA of freedom. I mean, and when you look back, you know, I agree with you know, Stefan's point. One way to look back to 1941 is not to kind of wring up your hands with the failure, but look at the remarkable success that you actually had this kind of commitment to freedom in the region. And when you look at the path of freedom, you know, post 1989, this is a country and a people that has freedom in its DNA. And you know, whatever the government looks like or the democracy looks like or whatever, these are people that by their nature recognize the value of human freedom and are committed to them. All those three things, I think, make Georgia an important and potentially successful country. It's not 1921. Georgia has options, and it has important choices to make. In the nexus of great power competition between the United States and Europe and Russia, and for that matter, China, all of which you have an interest in the future of Georgia. The fate of Georgia, I think, is in the hands of Georgians. You know, nobody is going to forcefully occupy Georgia. If Georgia falls one way or another, it would be because of decisions made by Georgians. And I largely think the Achilles heel to that will be your political solidarity. So whatever the internal governance challenges or whatever, if the political solidarity isn't there to put Georgian freedom above all else, that I think is your greatest weakness. I think there's enormous, and I'll end on this, there's enormous potential to build on. You know, Georgians, because I think there is a foundation, you know, into the last 4 years of a great relationship in the United States. It's a couple of crucial developments in addition to, you know, Georgia's contributions in Iraq and Afghanistan. The shift to moving the bilateral security relationship to developing Georgia's territorial forces and defense is crucial and important. It has to continue. And I think the political engagement with the US has to grow and strengthen. And from all the political parties in Georgia. And I think that will actually contribute. But I will end on this. In 1921, it didn't matter what people thought because the future of their country was not in their hands. It was in the hand of great powers. In 2021, the great powers have an interest in Georgia, maybe even greater than it was in 1921. But the difference is, I think today, the future of Georgia is in the hands of Georgians. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for all speakers for your thoughtful and interesting and thought-provoking comments. A lot to discuss here, and probably we'll go maybe another round and start with Stephen for my follow-up maybe questions. Stephen, you talked a lot about importance of economy, and again, looking at parallels from 100 years ago and today. Just wanted you to maybe spend a little bit more time on this. You know, when you look at developments in Georgia last 30 years, particularly the last 25 years, with all the international projects that were implemented in Georgia, you all know about 2 months ago, another flow of large-scale energy natural gas in this case, started to flow actually from Azerbaijan all the way to Italy. That was preceded by build up of the oil pipelines and natural gas pipelines. Comparing today's Georgia and 100 years old Georgia, Georgia is definitely, I agree with Jim on that, it's a very different place. I agree that there are still lots of hardships and lots of problems. But in a sense, trajectory of overall development. Obviously, today is a very difficult environment because of COVID and because of other things and internal political tensions and so forth. But let's look at this, let's distance ourselves from kind of today's peculiarities of March 2nd, 2021, and look at from a little bit above the picture, what's happening. Let's do this, let's attempt to compare this 100 years old picture and today's picture. Stephen. You are muted. You are muted, Stephen. Stephen, you are muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Mamuka, and you know, thank you also for Becca and Jim's comments. I mean, I thought they were both very thoughtful. You know, Becca made important comments about the relationship of the opposition to the Georgian government, the First Republic, being different in the sense that the Georgian government was actually more tolerant of the opposition than we see today. And Jim made the point about you know, the very significant problem that Georgia faced in 1921, which was this imperialistic Soviet power that had the strategic ambition to occupy the entire South Caucasus, and there wasn't much that anybody could do about it. And of course, it's very different today. I understand those comments, and I appreciate them. Regarding the economy, I mean, again, you're right, Mamuka. There is enormous difference. Georgia has made incredible economic progress in the last 20 years. You know, in the First Republic, the economy was a total disaster, and it wasn't entirely Georgia's fault. As Becca pointed out, you know, it came out from a Russian empire, and you know, they had to rebuild institutions. The Georgian government was paying Russian civil servants to get home back to Russia. I mean, there were all sorts of expenses that it had to deal with. It was blockaded by Western powers until 1920, part of the sort of post-war situation. It couldn't sell its manganese. I mean, that's okay. There were all sorts of problems for the Georgian economy, and that seriously impacted its ability to defend itself. There were other mistakes that I mentioned too, in terms of this bifurcated military structure that they had. Other countries in Eastern Europe, Poland, for example, would be a good example, really got straight to the issue of creating a centralized, united Polish army, and actually was able, as a consequence, to resist Soviet Russia. So, yeah. A different situation in the First Republic, but what I mean about the security problems that are faced by Georgia today, connected with the economy, is more about, I guess, domestic situation. Georgia, yes, has built the structures for a democracy, even if some Westerners call it a dysfunctional democracy. You know, the basis is there. It's clear, and actually, you know, Georgia is functioning as a democracy better than some East European countries. But there's a persistent weakness, I believe, and a persistent threat to stability when you have around, as Georgians themselves see it in public opinion surveys, when you have something like 50% of Georgians who don't consider themselves employed. So, you know, it's a weakness that the Georgian government has been able to overcome with Western help, no doubt. But it is a problem that has to be tackled if you're going to ensure a stable future for Georgian democracy. So that's what I meant in essence about the problems of economic security in Georgia.
Thank you, Stephen. My comment, you know, my opinion about that. I consider unemployment as a probably #1 security threat to Georgia. A lot of problems in Georgia comes from there, and I think I always make this argument when I have direct dealings with the Georgian government, or when I comment on these issues, that there are still too much power in state hands in Georgia, and there is too many assets in still state hands that needs to be freed up and given to free entrepreneurial initiatives of Georgian citizens. I think that is the only way Georgia can really move forward, fighting not just unemployment, overall economic growth and development. On just minor comment on status of democracy and status of opposition and government relations. I think, again, my opinion is that definitely always responsibility falls on the government when there are tensions and issues and when crises emerge. But in a sense, it's a shared responsibility of political class. And unfortunately, we don't see that political class in general demonstrates the maturity that Georgia needs at this stage. But when you look at the status of democracy, and Becca, I'm kind of leading to question to you, looking at let's say media space, I know there are lots of different kind of stories dealing with TV stations and so forth, but reality is that there are at least 3, but probably much more than 3 very, very critical media outlets and TV outlets in Georgia. There are many other obviously electronic and printed media that is very, very critical to government, and sometimes again, not constructive, but rather populistic, probably critical. But again, this shows the level of maturity of Georgian society, or immaturity of Georgian society, in terms of how we deal with each other, unfortunately. But the question would be, again, if you could see the comparison between today and 100 years ago, #1, and #2. At some point, I would like you to comment on Kars agreement, because this is a lot of speculation we hear. Maybe Stephen, you as well later on can comment on that. A lot of speculation in Georgia and a lot of tensions kind of internally about this issue. Becca, maybe you try to again turn the video off and try speak that way, and let's see if that gives us better sound.
Okay,
go ahead, please.
Thank you. I hope that I'm heard better now. There is quite a significant difference between the First Republic and the current Georgia, because Georgians boast that in 1919 Georgia held free and fair elections based on universal suffrage, etc. But it was free, but was it fair or not? This is still a question, because did Georgia have a qualified votes at that time? Because fewer than 30% of population was literate by that time. And how do you vote? How do you vote if you are not literate and if you don't get sufficient amount of information on the party programs, on the personalities, etc. Moreover, the biggest newspaper in the First Republic was Social Democratic one, Ertoba, Unity, and it was printed in 10,000 copies. While Georgia had more than 1 million voters. So how you inform more than 1 million voters with 10,000 copies of newspaper? It was rather imitation of democracy, I think, because many things depended on the village and regional coordinators the parties had. So the kind of chieftains, local chieftains, whoever had more local chieftains in the regions, the one was winning elections, and obviously Social Democrats had much more than anyone else. Now, this is not an important issue even today, that there are a lot of speculations about coordinators which ruling parties and opposition parties have in the regions. But current Georgia have nearly 100% literate voters. Current Georgia has internet, media, television, but in a way, this is not. This doesn't mean being on the safer side, because currently this informational operations, fake news are challenging population with false information. And yes, Georgia has quite a few oppositionary televisions, other media outlets online, and radios and stuff like that, but it's not balanced. If we compare current Georgian opposition TVs or pro-governmental TVs, they are much more biased than they were in the First Republic. Stephen here would agree with me that even Social Democratic or ruling party's newspaper, Ertova, in the First Republic, was very often very critical to the government and very self-critical to the Social Democratic Party, which we don't see. I mean, our current media environment is as much polarized as political environment. As for the Kars agreement, yes, there are a lot of allegations and speculations around the Kars agreement, not only in Georgia, but in Armenia too. And here, this has a reason, because we historians very well know that starting from 19th century, Russian official spine, informational historiographical spine, is based on kind of Turkophobia. So if you are afraid of Turks, then you turn pro-Russian. So starting from 19th century, including the Soviet period and even today, Russian propaganda machine or historiography tries to bring forward demonized Turkey, which is taking over Georgia and Armenia, and therefore Georgia and Armenia should turn pro-Russian. And this propaganda around Kars agreement is the case. By the way, when I was delivering a lecture at the University of California, Los Angeles, in Los Angeles, I was asked by the Armenians in the audience that now Kars agreement expires and Turkey will take over our countries, and what's going to happen? But this is not true, because this agreement exists. It needs to be read, and there is really nothing dangerous in it. There are three chapters about Georgia. This is nothing dangerous. So one point is about using without customs-free railways and harbors of Batumi. Second point is about local liberties of local populations, that they have a rights to rule Ajara region according to their customs. And third point is that Batumi belongs to the Soviet Georgia. I think that none of these 3 points pose existential threat to current Georgia, but Kars agreement was given a new blow in 1992. There was agreement signed between Suleiman Demirel and Eduard Shevardnadze. And I would remind you what was 1992. Imagine that Georgia has a war in South Ossetia, war in Abkhazia is approaching. We have territorial dispute nearly with every neighbors, and the only country with whom Georgia has done demarcation of the border is Turkey. And this demarcation of the border was done during the Soviet period. And at that time, Demirel and Shevardnadze came up with an idea that we should agree that we don't change borders. So we established the same borders as it was established during the Soviet time. I mean, this is something similar as, for example, Helmut Kohl did with the new Polish leadership. That I mean, they together condemned Soviet past and totalitarian past, but they agreed on the borders, that we keep the same borders, right? So this Demirel and Shevardnadze agreement, Demirel-Shevardnadze agreement was something very positive, and it primarily envisaged border agreement, that we don't change borders. So all irrational fears about Karsk agreement should be dismissed here, I think.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you. I know that Jim needs to leave shortly, so Jim, maybe some final comments from you, and we'll continue.
Yeah, you know, as long as we're continuing on our theme of history, I'd remind that there are many small powers that have been kind of in the crosshairs of great power competition and dealt with issues similar to Georgia. And you know, probably the penultimate example is Israel, which has had some very incredibly dynamic and divisive politics over the years. Yet, you know, the Israeli people recognize at the end of the day, their pursuit of democracy and their internal politics, that could not compromise the future of freedom and their ultimate security. So, you know, on the one hand, I said, look, the future of Georgia is in the hand of Georgians. I really believe that. And on the other hand, I would say I think the internal conflicts sometimes seem overwhelming. But the notion, you know, if there's a people that can transcend them and show a common face to the world, that this is a country that wants to embrace freedom and embrace an independent national identity, I think the Georgian people are well equipped to do that. And I do have to run, but thank you again for including me today. Thank
you, Dr. Garifano, and we hope to have you again sometime soon on our future events. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, there is a question from Eka from Voice of America. She again refers to the parallels of occupation then and occupation of territories now, but also how we can deal with the false narratives and falsification of history and historical facts that is coming from Kremlin today. And overall, I think, how shall we deal with the propaganda that Becca also was referring to, that is coming from Moscow, utilizing some of the national feelings of Georgia and historical sort of feelings. Some of them have definitely some grounds behind them, that there are some fears, that there are some issues, historical issues, and it cannot not evaporate it. But at the same time, and dismiss them. But at the same time, what type of threat we are facing with this type of propaganda? And by the way, Becca, your comments we've heard very well. So next time you comment, probably turn your video off again. So it was much better. Stephen, please.
Yeah, of course, this is a pretty universal problem, right? The United States has also experienced this sort of interference. You know, it's a very difficult problem to deal with. Russian propaganda in particular, when it concerns Georgia. But I think one of the ways to deal with it, let's say, is obviously to have a better media environment in Georgia than we have right now. Becca referred to this, that it's a highly polarized media. So, you know, one side says something, the other says something completely the opposite. You know, Georgian citizens are confused by their own media, let alone Russian propaganda. The other part to this, I think, you know, and I get increasingly skeptical about this, given what's happened in the United States, where, you know, a very large number of people still believe that the election was falsified here. It shows that human beings are highly susceptible to misinformation. And I think one way to deal with it, although it's a long-term solution, obviously, is to invest in public education, is to improve the qualities of education, which in Georgia needs some considerable improvement, and also to have, make central to education civics lessons. Really stress the importance of how to behave as a citizen, what you need to do, how you have to analyze information that you receive, and these sorts of things. It's long term, but it is an educational process. It's also a question of trying to think of a way to improve the Georgian media at home, because right now they behave like propaganda channels themselves. The dreaded word regulation might be coming in here. I don't know, but how do you create certain standards for the media? I think that's a very important part of this.
Thank you, Stephen. And maybe next question goes to, since you, again, obviously it's hard to avoid conversation about today when you have, when you talk about Georgia. And so there's a question, how you deal with the situation when opposition got so much votes and so many seats in the parliament and they are not taking it. And my personal view is that they should have taken it. Actually, I communicated to some of the people that I know in opposition to do that, because that would have strengthened, in my opinion, Georgian democracy rather than weaken it. The situation where we are today is worse than we would have been if there was a competitive second tour of majority candidate elections and so forth. But that's just my personal opinion on this. What do you think, Stephen, and then Becca? This is a question from the audience. So you're muted, Stephen.
I'm going to pass this to Becca.
Go ahead, Becca.
Right. Yeah, I fully agree with you, Mamuka, that opposition should have taken those seats. From the first, it was in 1st November when I stated that I disapprove this childish kind of decision not to take seats in the parliament. But on the other hand, in Georgia, we have tendency for last more than a decade when the ruling party, before going to the elections, enjoys already significant lead to many extents. So in their hands, there is a state budget, so which they can use in a public manner. In their hands is actually majority of the media outlets. In their hands is administrative resources. Governmental parties shape and form election commissions. After all, the election system, election system. And then you as an opposition, have very little chance, if any, to win election in fair manner. So when this happens, and these opposition members are also Georgians, they're supporters of Georgians, they're hot-headed very often and hot-blooded, and they make immature decisions. So and then this becomes a spiral, because attempt to monopolize power triggers radical measures from opposition, and radical measure from opposition then triggers kind of anti-system actions from the opposition, like, for example, from the side of Gamelia, and then it triggers arrest from the governmental side. So, I mean, they're playing, both parties are playing like, strong boys, like they are hawkish in a way, both sides. And in a way, this escalates higher and higher, and it's end up with polarization of society, which drags back country into 1990s. So, I mean, in 2012, we had significant progress as a democracy and as a country, and I think that for the moment, political system is behind to what it was in 2012.
Thank you, Bekas. We'll still have now this time around problems, but hopefully we'll hear you better. But we understood what you said, but it just comes with some noise attached to it. Simon, why don't I turn to you right now before we get too close to end of this discussion, and maybe you can tell the story of your grandfather in short, and then maybe Stephen can comment on that, and Becca as well, because this is a kind of remarkable and interesting story, and shows also a little bit of connection that was in place between the United States and Georgia then in 1921. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mamuka. I do think that this story is unusual, but it is also probably one of thousands of unusual stories that came out of this time period in 1921. And I was able to sort of find it in my grandfather's memoirs. Basically 100 years ago, he was, and I'm named after him, Simon Cinnamon Aristov. He had just turned 30, and he was a colonel in the Georgian Army, and serving as the chief of staff of the 1st Georgian Infantry Division, stationed on the Black Sea front, trying to protect Georgia's sovereignty. And he was a career military officer. He was born outside of Tbilisi and had been educated in military schools and served as an officer in the Russian Imperial Army during World War I. And there's some great stories in his memoirs about that too. But 3 years before the invasion, during the Russian Revolution, he returned from St. Petersburg to his native Georgia. Since the early 16th century, the members of his family, the Sidamon family, had been the hereditary Eristavis, or dukes of the Aragvi region of Georgia. So he was there, and the fighting continued even after, on the Black Sea front, after Tbilisi fell to the Soviet communists, I guess on February 25th, Stephen, if I'm not mistaken. But 19 days later, the outcome of the war was really no longer in doubt. The Georgian government was in collapse, and the Soviet Russians were marching on Batumi, and the Georgian army dispersed, and my grandfather had to escape, and he and 5 others, including his brother, decided to try to ride to Turkey on horseback. And as the 5 of them approached the piers in Batumi, they saw a boat being rowed away from the shore by sailors wearing white American caps. And the sailors stopped rowing and started waving their hands and shouting. And he couldn't really hear they stopped their horses. He couldn't hear what they were saying. And they said, Colonel Aristov, Colonel Aristov. And he was obviously incredulous. He didn't know, had no expectation that anybody would there. He said, yes, I'm Colonel Aristov. And the American officer in sort of broken Russian said that the commander of my destroyer ordered me to keep a boat at the pier to pick up Colonel Aristov. I have orders to pick you up. And the commander wouldn't take Simon's brother or any of the others. They urged him to go on and get on the boat, get out of Dodge. And that was actually the last time he saw his brother. And we sort of wonder, well, why was that destroyer there at that time? Well, to fill in the backstory, Simon's Georgian wife had died 16 months earlier of typhoid, leaving him with a 5-year-old child. And he had placed the child under the care of his cousin, Sanya, and her mother. And luckily for Simon, Sanya, his cousin, was having an affair with the American consul, the US Consul General to Georgia. And they would later get married after he divorced. But since the consul's girlfriend was responsible for this young child, the consul wanted to make sure that Colonel Aristov made it out of Georgia alive. So it was he who arranged through the US Admiral for a destroyer to be standing by in the harbor to pick up Colonel Aristov. And actually all of this had been supposedly explained in a letter to my grandfather, but he'd never gotten the letter. And 4 months later, that same consul would arrange passage for him from Istanbul or Constantinople, I guess in those days, to America. And for him and 2 of his cousins. And the idea was for him to establish himself and then send for his daughter. And he and his cousins got visas and tickets in steerage on a Greek boat and $50 each. And they arrived in the United States in September after a month at sea at Ellis Island. And carrying literally everything they owned in the world. It took them 2 hours to walk from Battery Place to a YMCA on 23rd Street where they could stay for 75 cents a night. And my grandfather spoke no English other than a few phrases that he had learned from a Berlitz book that someone had loaned him on the boat. But he landed on his feet. After a few days at the YMCA, he had another stroke of good fortune. Again, thanks to a Georgian woman, the ex-wife of another one of his cousins had remarried to an American, and she tracked the 3 princes down and invited them to dinner at the Colony Club, which is a fancy club on Park Avenue, women's club, with her husband and some of their friends. And my grandfather wore a used suit that he had purchased in Istanbul from an undertaker. That was all he had, And in the course of the evening, the talk turned to what should be done with the 3 princes, and it was decided then and there that Simon should be sent to stay at the home in the Hudson Valley of the sister of one of his host's friends. And the next day off he went by train, and the idea was that he would stay there for a few weeks and help with the driving and exercising the horses and, working in the vegetable garden while he learned some English and got his feet on the ground. And, Simon's cousin had told everyone that Simon was a very good chauffeur, but actually he had no driving experience at all. He'd always ridden horses or had a driver of his own when he was in the Army. So instead, what happened was that he settled in as a long-term guest of the family, according to old Georgian custom, as the story goes. And they couldn't get him to leave. And in a way, he never really did leave. He fell in love with and married the family's daughter. They had 2 children, one of whom was my father. That house is still in the family. And we can talk about what happened after 1921 at Mamuka's next webinar. But this is just one man's story, but there must be thousands of other stories like it. And I wouldn't be here to tell the tale if my grandfather hadn't had a little luck and a lot of help. And that's probably a common theme to all of those stories. So thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. This is like great story of connection.
Mamuka, may I ask a question to Simon?
Sure.
Simon, was the consul Charles Moser, if you know?
Yes, it was Charles Moser. That's exactly who it was.
Right. Thank you.
Stephen, you want to say something about that, or are you crying?
I am sort of crying. I mean, that's an incredible story, and I'm sure, as Simon said, that there are many stories like it of Georgian emigres, coming out of Georgia in 1921, desperate with nothing, and many of them ended up actually going to Poland, joining the Polish army there under Pilsudski, and we saw the legacy of that with
Saakashvili family.
Saakashvili. So yeah, an extraordinary story, and I agree with Simon. This is the stuff of history, of course. This is, we talk about these big events. Very often we neglect to think about how all this was affecting ordinary people and ordinary families. And of course, it was a tragedy in 1921 when only a few Georgians managed to get away from Soviet occupation. Yeah, I would agree with Simon. It would be very useful to have at some stage a seminar about the experience of Georgian emigres in the United States. I think that's a story that we really haven't heard very much about. I mean, we know about the founding of the Georgian Association in 1932, I believe, set up by Georgi Machabeli and others. But it would be really fascinating to pursue that story, and because it was just a total adventure for all these Georgian emigres arriving here.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's I think not everyone was probably as lucky as your grandfather, Simon, yeah. Definitely. And but it's a way this story continued with your father, Konstantin Sidamon Aristov, establishing American Friends of Georgia, the organization that is very active now, helping and supporting Georgia and people in need in Georgia is very essential. And of course, you continue carrying this torch and carrying this responsibility is. There are not many third generation Georgians around who are also keeping the kind of connection with Georgia. And this is also definitely important and remarkable. Becca, some of maybe your final comments?
Mamuka, before I make any comment, I read that Recep is with us and he wants to make some comments. And when Recep wants to do it, I cannot do first.
Fortunately, we cannot. This is a webinar format. I don't know how we can squeeze them in.
We cannot switch Recep. Yeah. Okay, what to do?
I think you have to make a comment and maybe ask Recep to send us a written note, and one of us will read it.
Right. Yes, this is very impressive story, Simon. And I unfortunately I didn't know that Moser had a Georgian wife. So I mean, this is what you say, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he
married. I didn't know that Moser had a Georgian wife. This is something worth tracing further. I mean, something useful for my future research, let's say. But Moser didn't have a perfect relationship with the Georgian government, unfortunately. And this is understandable because the United States was the only country among the Allied powers who didn't recognize independence of Georgia. Before Moser, there was an interesting man, a consul called Felix Willoughby Smith. And next time you are in Tbilisi, maybe I should take you to show you the building where there was a consulate, U.S. consulate in Tiflis. It was Dadiani Street 15, and we even have this board, contemporary board, which says Consulate General in Tiflis, United States, with the coat of arms of United States. And very interestingly is the...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but actually we managed to add Recep while he's under different name. It's still Recep. So
right.
Yeah, so, somebody needs to unmute Recep. Sorry, Becca, for interruption. Can somebody help to unmute? Mike?
There.
Here is Recep, son of first president of Georgia, no, Jordania, Recep Jordania.
I'd like to make a little comment on Simon's very interesting expose. I had the pleasure of reading the book that his grandfather wrote and it was never published. But I had, I was given a copy about at least 50 years ago. And there are many fascinating things in this book, including what Simon just described. But more to the point right now, he describes the fighting against the Soviet invasion until the fall of Batumi. It's about probably about 20, 30 pages, and it's absolutely fascinating. I would really ask Simon, if possible, to put it online because it's very appropriate and very timely for all of us to read these pages. Thank you.
Yeah, I will try to do that.
Thank you, Recep. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I have the copyright, so it shouldn't be too hard. Actually, what I really want to do is put it on Amazon and have you all buy a copy there. Second edition.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Becca, why don't you finish your thought? And thank you, Recep, again. And we'll probably wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I was done, so I will not further take your time. Mamuka, thank you very much indeed for organizing this very insightful and good panel with very good people around. And I very much hope that next events are to come.
Thank you, Stephen. Final word. And
yeah, and I want to thank you, Mamuka, and everybody who participated. It was very interesting, and I want to just stress that, though I was rather critical, I am very optimistic about, I'm always optimistic about Georgia's future. I do sort of agree with Jim. I'm not sure it's genetic, but I do think that, the Georgians do, in the South Caucasus compared to the other republics there at least, there is this, there was, for example, a much more thriving civil society, I would argue, in Georgia in the 1990s through the 2000s than in the other republics. There is something about the individualism of Georgians that gets them through these crises. And I think we have to remember that even though what we're seeing today, and I agree entirely with Becca that, the opposition boycotting the parliament is a very bad idea. But, the fact that Georgians are willing to fight for ideas that they believe in, even though it leads to civil disruption at times, right, is something that at some level I think is quite valuable, and is if it gets out of hand, obviously it can be a threat to democracy. But on the other hand, that energy and that desire to defend themselves from what they see as oppression, and I'm talking about Georgian citizens right now, sometimes gets them through these threats, right? These difficult situations. So, yeah, I mean, yes, 21 was a tragedy, and what we're seeing today is very difficult to watch in Georgia. But overall, I'm just so impressed by Georgians' ability to pull themselves out of such tragic situations and to create systems that are democratic and tolerant. So, yeah, just want to end with that. With some optimism.
Thank you. Thanks to all our speakers, to Stephen, Becca, Dr. Carafano, to Simon, of course, to Recep for his intervention, very positive and interesting. And, probably as some of us get older, so we become sort of more philosophical about everything and including about Georgia. And looking at, of course, I agree, Stephen, looking at Georgia is very difficult when in fact is weakening country, and we see that reflects on international standing and strategic standing of Georgia as well. But I see it as a still temporary bump. And I see picture in the larger sort of trajectory of developments since 1991. And despite many bumps and many setbacks, trajectory is upward and positive. And that's what I really believe, and that's what I see, and that's what I want to see going forward, despite these bumps and setbacks. So with that optimistic note that things will go upward and forward to the brighter future of Georgia, I would like to end this session, and with the hope that we'll have many more sessions like this, and talking maybe about more positive developments, both historical as well as modern day current developments. Thanks again to our collaborators in this organization of this event, to American Friends of Georgia, to Georgian Association United States. Oldest Georgian organization in the United States is Georgian Association, founded in 1932. Which was mentioned here, and to America Georgia Business Council, my organization, and thanks to all the listeners. And we hope to see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamuka.
Thank you.
Dedim,